Most people find out their marriage has been over for years through a lawyer's letter or a late night confession. I found out through a chimney sweep named Gabe standing in my basement, holding a waterproof case with two padlocks that I had never seen in my life and that had somehow been hidden inside my own fireplace cleanout for God knows how long. My name is Randall Shea. I'm 57 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, commercial infrastructure, mostly bridges, drainage systems, the kind of work that shapes a city but that nobody mentions at dinner parties. I retired from Meridian Group 3 years ago, do some consulting to keep my mind from going soft, and I live in a 4-bedroom house in Brentwood, Tennessee, 12 minutes from downtown Nashville depending on traffic, which in this city means it could also be 45. I grow tomatoes in the backyard in summer. I coach youth baseball on Saturday mornings when the weather cooperates. Until 22 days ago, I would have told you, without hesitating, without irony, that I was about as content a man as you were likely to find in Middle Tennessee. We'll get to why that changed. But before we do me one favor. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. A lot of people find these stories and never do it, and it costs you nothing. Like the video while you're at it, and leave a comment when you're done, because I'm going to want to know what you think. You're going to have thoughts. Now my wife. Her name is Sharon. We've been married 19 years, together for 22. She's 52, runs the front office at a dental practice in Cool Springs. She is organized in the way that makes other organized people feel slightly embarrassed about themselves. Color-coded calendars, grocery lists sorted by store aisle, packed suitcases 3 days before any trip. I used to tease her about it. Sharon, it's a long weekend in Gatlinburg, not a congressional subcommittee. She'd smile and keep folding. I thought that was a quirk. I understand now it was infrastructure. This started on a Thursday in October. Sharon had driven up to Knoxville to spend 5 days with her mother, who just had knee replacement surgery and needed help with meals and getting around. Completely legitimate, completely reasonable. The kind of thing a good daughter does. I stayed home. I had a consulting deadline, some yard work to catch up on, and I'd been meaning to get the chimney swept before we used the fireplace for the first time that season. Sharon had reminded me twice. I finally made the call. Gabe Hollis from Volunteer Chimney Services showed up Thursday morning, a friendly man with work boots caked in old soot and the specific enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loves a job most people find forgettable. "Give me about an hour," he said, heading toward the living room with his equipment. I went back to the kitchen, poured coffee, opened my laptop. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Gabe, who was literally downstairs in my basement. "Mr. Shea, I found something in your ash cleanout access in the utility room. A case, like a waterproof equipment case. It's padlocked. Wasn't sure if you put it there intentionally, but wanted to check before I keep going." I read the text twice. "We don't store anything in the fireplace cleanout." I typed back, "Gabe, that should not be there. Don't touch it." 3 dots. Then, "I haven't, but there's something else you should know." I was already on my feet. The padlocks are on the outside of the latches, both of them. I stopped on the 3rd step down. Padlocks on the outside. I want you to sit with that detail for just a second, because I almost let it slide past me in the confusion of the moment. When you padlock something from the outside, you're not protecting what's inside from being taken. You're preventing what's inside from being opened from within. That's not storage. That's containment. Something about that word sent something cold through me before I even reached the bottom of the stairs. Gabe was standing in the utility area off the main basement room, next to the fireplace foundation, where the cast iron cleanout access door opens at ground level, a small panel original to the 1987 construction. He'd opened it for inspection and found the case sitting just inside, flush against the interior wall. Gray polymer, heavy duty, the kind photographers use for expensive glass or that field technicians use for equipment that can't get wet. About 14 inches long, not dusty, hadn't been there long. 2 padlocks, 2 hasps, both locked from outside. "Call the police," I told him. "Already thinking it," he said. 2 Metro Nashville officers arrived in 11 minutes. Sharon wasn't picking up my calls. I told myself she was probably in a physical therapy session with her mother, or driving, or somewhere without signal. I told myself a lot of things while I stood in my own basement, watching officers photograph a locked case I'd never seen before. They cut the padlocks and opened it. Inside, a USB drive in a small Ziploc bag, a burner phone with a cracked screen, battery still warm, a sealed manila envelope, and a digital voice recorder, the small kind reporters use, switched to on, red light blinking, recording the room in real time. Officer Haverfield picked up the burner phone with gloved hands. "This was recently active," she said, "within the last few minutes." Gabe looked at me. I looked at Haverfield. Someone knew you were down here, I said. She met my eyes without answering. That silence was its own answer. The manila envelope contained documents I had never seen. A registered LLC, Ridgeline Consulting, filed with the Tennessee Secretary of State 8 months earlier, with my name listed as sole member. Bank account records for a Ridgeline Consulting business account at a bank I don't use, showing deposits of $63,000 across 7 months. 3 invoices on Meridian Group letterhead, my former employer's letterhead, billed to a municipal drainage project in Shelby County for work I had never performed, signed with something that looked almost exactly like my signature. Almost. I spent 31 years producing engineering documents. I know how a fraudulent invoice is constructed. These were good. They were built by someone who had studied my work product long enough to understand the format, the billing codes, the specific language an infrastructure engineer uses when writing up a completed scope. Someone had studied me like a subject. A detective named Harkins took over 2 days later. He was methodical the way certain men are methodical, careful, observant, neutral, in a way that only unsettles you when you're not entirely sure which side of the table you belong on. He sat in my kitchen with a yellow legal pad and asked whether I knew a woman named Paula Reeves. I did not. Paula Reeves, he said, had been an administrative coordinator at Meridian Group until 6 months ago. She had resigned quietly around the same time the LLC was registered. She had also been reported missing 3 weeks prior by her roommate, last known address, an apartment complex in Antioch. Her name appears in 2 of the documents from the case, Harkins said, as a witness signature. I've never met this woman, I said. Completely true, but I was beginning to understand that complete truth and useful truth are not the same thing when someone has spent months constructing a different version of events around you. Sharon came home 2 days after the basement. I'd been deliberate on the phone. Something happened. I need you back here. I'll explain in person. When she walked through the door, she looked like a woman coming home to a crisis, hands immediately on my arms, eyes focused, concerned. Randall, tell me everything. Are you okay? I watched her face while I explained the case, the LLC, the invoices with my signature, Paula Reeves, Harkins, all of it. She responded exactly the way a worried wife responds, which I recognized in retrospect because I'd been watching a worried wife for 19 years and I knew the register. The subtle furrow between her brows at the right moment, the hand over her mouth, the way she reached across the counter for my hand when I mentioned the forged signature. Someone is setting you up, she said. This is deliberate. This is obviously deliberate. Obviously, I agreed. What I didn't say out loud, what I filed, was the half-second before the tears came. A stillness, brief as a dropped frame, like a screen freezing and recovering, the face of someone who has just heard a specific word they were waiting for and is adjusting course. I caught it. I didn't say anything about it. I have a friend named Steve Dunning. We went to Vanderbilt together, which was a very long time ago, and he spent the last 26 years working in banking compliance, which means he identifies the architecture of financial deception for a living. He's the kind of man who finds money trails the way a good hunting dog finds a scent, not dramatically, just completely. I called him on day 6. He listened to everything without interrupting, which, with Steve, means he's already running numbers in his head. Pull every joint account statement going back as far as you can, he said. And while you're at it, ask yourself who actually manages your household finances. I opened my mouth, closed it. Sharon had managed them since year 3 of our marriage. I'd mentioned, probably during tax season, that I found monthly reconciliation tedious. She'd offered to take it over. I'd said yes without thinking twice. The bills were paid. The savings account grew. The 401A performed. Everything ran the way a well-maintained house runs, quietly, without incident, in ways you only notice when they stop. Go back 5 years minimum, Steve said. I went back 6. What I found didn't announce itself. There were no single dramatic withdrawals, no transfers with obvious foreign destinations, nothing that would make a person gasp. Instead, there was a pattern, a recurring charge to a vendor name I didn't recognize, quarterly cash withdrawals consistently kept just below the $10,000 Bank Secrecy Act threshold, small recurring transfers to an account I couldn't immediately trace. Across 6 years, it added up to $47,000, moved in increments so calibrated that I'd never heard so much as a whisper. Steve came over the next morning and we spread everything across the dining room table, account records, the police report, the LLC filing, a timeline I'd built by hand on a legal pad at 2 in the morning. He studied it for a long time without speaking, which is his way of signaling that what he's looking at is worse than you initially calculated. The LLC was registered 8 months ago, he said. You retired from Meridian 3 years ago, so someone waited until you no longer had regular access to that office. No badge, no colleague contact, no way to be casually fact-checked, and then built a paper record of fraudulent billing in your name. The invoices look legitimate to anyone outside that firm, and if Paula Reeves was in place to provide a witness signature, I'd be looking at potential wire fraud, I said, possibly federal. Steve set down the papers. Federal investigations don't move quickly and they don't negotiate gently. If that evidence were submitted to the FBI, the process alone, not even a conviction, just the investigation, could freeze marital assets, drain your savings in legal fees, and take years. I sat with that. Years, during which I'd have nothing, control nothing, be consumed by nothing except clearing my own name, and Sharon would be gone. $47,000 already moved. A clean exit. Somewhere she'd described, I would later learn, as warm. The first irregular transaction in our accounts was dated 4 years into our marriage. 4 years in, when we just closed on this house, when I was pulling 60-hour weeks, when she had offered, warmly and practically, to take the finances off my plate so I could focus. She had stood in this kitchen and offered to help me breathe, and she had already started building. Before I go any further, if these stories mean something to you, hit the like button and subscribe to Dad's Real Revenge. It's what keeps these stories coming. Thank you. Now let me tell you what I did next. Here is something nobody prepares you for when someone you've shared a life with turns out to have been working against you the entire time. The hardest part isn't the evidence. The evidence is almost a relief eventually, because it means you weren't imagining things. The hardest part is the retroactive revision, going back through every dinner, every vacation, every ordinary Tuesday, and understanding that the person sitting across from you was always working. It had been 8 days since Gabe Hollis texted me from my basement. 8 days since Detective Harkins had begun appearing at irregular intervals, sometimes with questions, sometimes just present, parked down the street in an unmarked car like he hadn't decided what he thought of me yet. Sharon was performing concern beautifully. Every morning, coffee made before I came downstairs. Every evening, a hand on my shoulder. She asked whether I was sleeping, whether I'd spoken to a lawyer, whether I wanted her to come with me when Harkins called me in. She said all the right things in all the right sequences, and twice. I'll admit this. I had brief, disorienting moments of wondering if I had assembled the whole story out of grief and a wrecked state of mind. Then Steve asked me something that ended all that. The Chimney appointment. You said you called to schedule it. Which phone? And where was it the night before? I always charged my phone on the dresser overnight. And Sharon was in the bedroom? In the bedroom? With me. He looked at me steadily. Pull the outgoing call log, specifically the follow-up call rescheduling the appointment. I already knew what I'd find before I found it. Some part of me had known since the second text from Gabe, I think. I just hadn't been ready to look at it directly. The original appointment had been scheduled for my cell phone 3 weeks prior. But the rescheduling call, the one that moved the appointment to the specific Thursday Sharon left for Knoxville, had been made from my number at 7:42 in the morning. I had been on a video call with a client in Memphis at 7:30 that same morning. I had the calendar record, the client's email chain, and the session login timestamp to prove it. Sharon had taken my phone, rescheduled the appointment to a date when she'd be 5 hours away and I'd be home alone. Then she'd put the phone back on the dresser before my alarm went off. She had engineered the first act from our bedroom while I slept beside her. My brother lives up in Hendersonville, about 40 minutes north. He's 63, ex-Marine, constitutionally calm in the way that military service either builds or destroys in a person. I drove up on a Saturday morning and laid everything out. He listened without expression, the way he listens, like someone mapping terrain before deciding whether to cross it. When I finished, he said, "She talks to somebody, someone she trusts with the real version." Her college roommate, I told him, Mona. They'd been close since before Sharon and I ever met. Long calls once or twice a week, sometimes 2 or 3 hours. Sharon always took them in her home office with the door shut. My brother nodded once. "How long have you had the recorder in that room?" I looked at him. "You haven't," he said. "You're about to. I want to be clear about something. I am not a man who acts from anger. I coached youth baseball for 8 years. I have never in my adult life done anything deliberately cruel to another person. I am patient, I am consistent, and I genuinely like most people I encounter. Vengeance is not something I was wired for. What I discovered, sitting at my brother's kitchen table, is that patience has a different face when the alternative is a federal fraud case you didn't commit and the loss of everything you spent 30 years building." My brother sourced the recorder. The particulars aren't important. I installed it on a Sunday afternoon while Sharon was grocery shopping. A small device, no larger than a USB thumb drive, tucked behind the decorative tray on the bookshelf in her home office, a shelf she has not rearranged in 11 years. It took me 4 minutes. I confirmed the audio feed was clean. Then I went home and made dinner. I waited 17 days. 17 days of being Randall Shea, cooperative husband, patient subject of an open investigation. 17 days of answering Harkin's questions without a lawyer, because engaging one at this stage would have read as guilt, and I needed to read as exactly what I was. A man with nothing to hide and no idea what had been done to him. 17 days of watching Sharon make coffee in the mornings and ask if I'd slept okay. Then Mona came to visit for a weekend. I made myself scarce, told Sharon I had some consulting work and a few things to take care of, kissed her cheek, and drove exactly 3 blocks away before pulling over and opening the recorder app. The audio was clean. They talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things. Mona's daughter's travel soccer team, a restaurant in East Nashville worth the drive, a cousin's engagement in the spring. I almost convinced myself I'd constructed the whole thing, that I'd planted a listening device in my wife's home office based on nothing but paranoia and pain. Then Sharon's voice changed. I don't know how to describe it more precisely than that. Same woman, same room, same voice. But something drained out of it, the warmth specifically. What replaced it was something flat and deliberate, like a thermostat dropping 10 degrees without anyone touching it. He's cooperating with everything, Sharon said, still trying to work out the logic of it. Mona waited. He thinks there's a rational explanation if he's just patient enough. That's Randall. That's always been Randall. A pause. And the woman, Paula? Phoenix, Sharon said. She's comfortable. She knows to stay gone for 90 days. After 90 days, the paper record stands on its own regardless. I sat in that parked car and heard my wife explain in that calm, evacuated voice the timeline of my destruction. The motive, she told Mona, was simple enough. She'd wanted to leave for years, but she didn't want to leave with half of what we'd built over 19 years. Half the equity in the house, half the retirement accounts, half the savings. She wanted a clean exit, and she wanted a reason for that exit. That wasn't just I stopped wanting this. A federal fraud investigation, even without a conviction, just the investigation itself, would freeze marital assets, consume our savings and legal costs, and eliminate my ability to pursue any meaningful financial settlement. She'd walk away with what she'd already moved quietly over 6 years, plus whatever she could claim in the chaos, and she'd go somewhere she called warm. And you'll be where? Mona asked. Gone, Sharon said simply, like a woman who had been standing next to a door for a long time and was finally reaching for the handle. There was a silence. Sharon, Mona's voice had gone careful, uncertain. This is almost finished, Sharon said. I sat in that parked car for a long time after the recording ended. Not in anger. Anger was too loud for what I was feeling. It was something quieter, the specific cold of a man who has finally accepted the full scale of what's in front of him and stopped spending energy hoping he's wrong. I did not call my brother. I did not call Steve. I did not go to Harkin's that night. I went home, had dinner, watched an hour of television, and went to bed while Sharon read beside me. I lay in the dark and felt a decision settle, not made dramatically, not announced to anyone, just present, solid. The next morning I hired a private investigator named Deke Arnett, former Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, recommended through a contact of my brother's, the kind of man whose entire professional affect is a filing cabinet, efficient, thorough, and conspicuously unimpressed by anything he encounters. I gave Deke one instruction. Find Paula Reeves. It took him 9 days. She was in Phoenix, exactly as Sharon had said. Mid-range hotel off Camelback Road, registered under a slightly adjusted version of her own name, paid in cash, prepaid credit card on file. Deke got photographs. He got her on record. He got a notarized statement from a woman who had, it became clear, not fully understood what she was agreeing to when she signed those documents and accepted payment to make herself scarce for 90 days. Paula Reeves was 29 years old. She'd left a job she didn't like, needed money more than she needed to ask detailed questions, and had agreed to what she understood as a civil matter. Signing some documents as a witness, taking a paid extended stay in Arizona, staying quiet. When Deke sat across from her in that hotel lobby and explained what wire fraud and conspiracy meant as they applied to her specific situation, she cried for a while. Then she told him everything, how Sharon had found her through a mutual connection, what she'd been paid, what she'd been instructed to say if anyone asked. She signed the statement with shaking hands, and Deke sat with her until she steadied. Because Deke is unexpectedly decent for a man who looks like a government filing cabinet. I now had two things Sharon didn't know existed: the recording from her home office and a signed, notarized statement from a woman who was supposed to be missing. Two things. That was enough. On a Friday evening, while Sharon sat in the living room with a book, relaxed, unhurried, the picture of a woman whose plan is running on schedule, I sat at the kitchen table, opened a new email account she'd never seen, and sent two files to a number I'd obtained specifically for this. The first was an audio clip, 48 seconds of Sharon's voice in that flat, drained register, saying gone and almost finished. The second was a photograph. Paula Reeves, alive and visibly unimpressed, standing in a Phoenix hotel lobby, holding a handwritten card with that morning's date on it. No message, no name, no explanation, just the two files. I washed my coffee mug, went upstairs, and was asleep before 10. She came downstairs 20 minutes later. I wasn't quite asleep yet. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, slower than usual, deliberate, and then the bedroom doorway brightened briefly as she stood there. I kept my breathing steady. She stood there long enough that the darkness started to feel different. Sharon had not stood still in a doorway in 19 years of marriage. She was always moving, always adjusting something. She stood there like a woman who has just heard a sound she can't place and doesn't know which direction to face. Then she went back downstairs quietly. The following morning, I drove to Detective Harkin's office and placed Deke Arnett's complete report on his desk. The notarized statement, the photographs of Paula Reeves, the audio recording from the home office, the financial records Steve had compiled, the call log showing I was on video with a Memphis client when Sharon rescheduled the Chimney appointment from my phone. Every document labeled, every timeline cross-referenced, organized in a single folder with a metal clasp, because I am a civil engineer and I build things designed to hold. Harkins read for 9 minutes without looking up. "Mr. Shea," he said finally. "Randall," I said. He looked at me for a moment, then picked up his phone. Sharon was arrested on a Wednesday, 11 charges including wire fraud, identity theft, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. She was walked out of our house in handcuffs at 8:15 in the morning, cold enough to see your breath in the air. I stood in the doorway. She looked back once, just once, at the end of the driveway before they guided her toward the patrol car. I have spent 19 years reading Sharon's face. Every expression, every register, every microshift. The face she made when she was satisfied with something. The face she made when she was calculating. The face she made when she thought no one was paying attention. I knew this woman's face the way you know the route to your own house. Without thinking, without effort, just knowing. She looked back at me from that driveway, and I could not read a single thing. That was new. And I'll be honest with you, that was the only moment in this entire story where I felt something close to grief. But here is what Sharon never understood, the fundamental miscalculation at the center of an otherwise meticulous plan. She spent years learning how I moved through a day. She knew my signature. She knew how I charged my phone and how I scheduled my mornings, and which tasks I found tedious enough to hand off without thinking. She built something designed to hold a very specific version of Randall Shea, the man who finds reconciliation tedious, who trusts without auditing, who walks out the door every morning and doesn't look back. She never stopped to consider what I was thinking. Patience isn't passivity, consistency isn't blindness, and the man who tends his tomatoes every August and shows up for youth baseball every Saturday and trusts his wife to manage the household accounts, that man is not a fool. He's simply a man who has never been given a reason to look closely. She gave me a reason. She spent 19 years learning my routines. I dismantled hers in 17 days. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, thank you, genuinely. Hit the like button, subscribe to Dad's Real Revenge, and leave something in the comments. These stories keep coming because of you, and I will see you on the next one.